In the 1950s, two mysterious figures became the faces of the Mafia in America. Al Capone and Santo Trafficante have been linked to infamous incidents like the St. Valentine's Day Massacre and even implicated in the mysterious assassination of JFK. How much of their dark legacy is fact and how much is fiction? Let's take a look. In the mid-1950s, while Chicago had Capone and New York had Lucky Luciano, the spotlight in Florida, the international gateway to the Caribbean, was on Santo Trafficante. He ruled as a mob boss, transforming neighboring Cuba into a gambling paradise. Powerful and strategic, he stayed out of the limelight, positioning himself to become the wealthiest mob boss. On November 22nd, 1963, in Dallas, Texas, President Kennedy and his wife headed for lunch with civic leaders, embarking on a motorcade that would forever change history. As the president's car turns on Elm Street, 3 quick bullets hit their target. Chaos ensues, and Lee Harvey Oswald is swiftly identified as the lone culprit. Within hours, the pro-Cuban revolutionary is arrested, seemingly closing the case. 2 days later, as Oswald is transferred to the county jail, a new player emerges. Jack Ruby, with strong ties to Cuba, steps out of the crowd, gun in hand. A year later, the Warren Report concludes that Oswald and Ruby acted alone, driven by political motives and personal grievances. But did they? Was Oswald working for the CIA, Fidel Castro, or even the mob? In 1978, a House Select Committee was formed to revisit the truth. In September of that year, the committee called upon a powerful and ruthless figure, once the head of the Florida Mafia and the king of Cuba's casinos, Santo Trafficante. At the moment news of the assassination broke, Blakey, then working as a prosecutor in the State Department, found himself in the office with Robert Kennedy, the late president's brother. The shocking reality that someone would target an American president was unfathomable. Initially dismissive of rumors implicating the mob, Blakey's perspective shifted when he drafted the groundbreaking RICO laws. These laws eventually led to the incarceration of leaders from 5 major crime families. As Blakey delved into the underworld, he realized the Mafia had evolved into a highly sophisticated organization. Before RICO, mob bosses enjoyed virtual immunity from prosecution, as they never directly committed violent acts. Now, Blakey turns his attention to Trafficante, once the kingpin of Cuban casinos. The first alarm bell rings with the death of Oswald. Oswald's murder not only bears the hallmarks of a mob hit, but the man behind it, Jack Ruby, is connected to a nightclub frequented by gangsters associated with New Orleans mob boss Carlos Marcello, a close ally of Trafficante. As chief counsel, Robert Blakey dug deeper. The original Warren Report, flawed in its conclusions, overlooked significant connections between Oswald and Carlos Marcello. Astonishingly, Lee Harvey Oswald's uncle and surrogate father is revealed to be Marcello's bookmaker. Both Oswald and Ruby have direct links to Cuba. Blakey, in his pursuit of truth, traces Trafficante's connections like concentric circles, revealing an organized crime network that may be implicated in the events surrounding Kennedy's assassination. In 1954, Trafficante inherited the Florida mob from his father, a rarity in the world of mafia bosses passing control to their sons. In the early 50s, Trafficante saw an opportunity to expand his modest gambling outfit in Tampa. The Caribbean island of Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, presented a potential gold mine. At that time, Cuba was under the rule of the brutal and corrupt dictator Fulgencio Batista, who opened the doors wide for the Mafia, operating without interference from American regulations. Mobsters, including Trafficante, heavily invested in casinos and hotels, enjoying the benefits of a corrupt government that kicked back a nightly 10% of casino earnings. Trafficante moved to Cuba around 1953 or 1954, engaging in the legal gambling and nightclub casino business, thriving under Batista's regime. Santo Trafficante amassed a fortune through multiple casinos and nightclubs, with interests in 5 lucrative establishments. The booming gambling scene in Cuba, coupled with Trafficante's cunning business strategies, made him one of the wealthiest mob bosses in the United States. However, a new and potentially more lucrative market emerges: illegal drugs. As drugs become a major commodity, Cuba, conveniently situated in Trafficante's backyard, becomes a key gateway. The combination of drug profits and gambling success propels Santo Trafficante Jr. to a prominent position at the top of the Mafia's hierarchy. In a summit held on November 14, 1957, in New York, attended by the top crime bosses from around the country, Trafficante Jr. was then on the radar. However, a significant turn of events occurs when law enforcement surrounds the meeting. Despite escaping arrest, the raid shed light on the national crime syndicate, confirming its existence, a revelation that shocks many, including FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who had long denied its reality. Trafficante, seeking to evade the unwanted attention, disappeared from public view and returned to Cuba. In Cuba, Trafficante continues to thrive, making millions through drug imports and channeling the profits through a network of casinos. However, his expanding empire faced a threat as Fidel Castro, a young revolutionary communist, aimed to overthrow General Batista. Unconcerned with politics but highly focused on profit, Trafficante took swift action. Aware of Castro's visits to Tampa before the revolution, Trafficante engaged in dealings with the rebel leader. Money changed hands, securing a deal that safeguards Trafficante's interests even if Castro's revolution succeeded. However, as violence escalated in 1958, Castro's forces disrupted profits, causing gamblers to abandon casinos. While other mob bosses retreated from Cuba, Trafficante remained, convinced he could weather the storm and retain his holdings. Yet, upon Castro's triumph on January 1st, 1959, Trafficante realized he had seriously miscalculated. The new regime posed a threat to his criminal empire, and he found himself in jeopardy. The Cuban officials targeted him, considering him a collaborator with Batista. Trafficante, anticipating arrest and fearing for his life, knew he had to leave quickly. He reached out to his longtime ally Carlos Marcello of New Orleans, seeking assistance. Trafficante, now stripped of his gambling empire in Cuba, left the country devastated. The millions he had invested were lost, and his seat at the top of the Mafia hierarchy was taken. The Cuban Revolution reshaped the landscape, and Las Vegas became the new focus for organized crime. Santo Trafficante harbored a deep resentment toward Castro, and even after leaving Cuba, he aligned himself with anti-Castro forces. In September 1960, Trafficante received a high-stakes proposition. Chicago boss Sam Giancana wanted him to carry out one of the most significant hits in mob history, to assassinate Fidel Castro. The CIA apparently reached out to mob boss Sam Giancana to eliminate the revolutionary leader of Cuba, Castro. The motivation? Desperation to rid themselves of a perceived threat. The narrative exposed a scandalous assumption by the CIA that the Mafia is a group of hired killers. Aware of the only man with the necessary connections, Santo Trafficante, the kingpin of Cuban casinos, the CIA pursued a sinister alliance. A meeting was arranged in Miami bringing together the CIA, Chicago mob boss Sam Giancana, and Santo Trafficante. When questioned about his reaction to killing President Castro, Trafficante's response was chilling, viewing it as a strategic move against communism. As the CIA suggests a classic mobster hit, Trafficante proposed a subtler approach, exploring poisoning. The discussion involves various methods, including poison pills. Trafficante, armed with a plan, secured over $150,000 in cash from the CIA, marking a dangerous alliance between the government and the Mafia. For Trafficante, the money and revenge against Castro were tempting, and an additional enticement was offered: immunity from law enforcement interference in Mafia operations. Behind the scenes, Giancana, the mob's connection, was instrumental in securing the presidency for a young senator named John F. Kennedy. The mob's contribution to Kennedy's victory was rewarded with an understanding: the Kennedys won't pursue legal action against them. With Kennedy in power, Trafficante believed he was home free, but the landscape shifted. The new administration prioritized Cuba, prompting the CIA to escalate plans from an assassination to a full-scale invasion. Immersed in his heavy investments in the Cuban exile movement in Florida, Trafficante anticipated a turning point on April 16, 1961. President Kennedy dispatched 1,500 mercenaries, bankrolled by the CIA, for an invasion of Cuba's Bay of Pigs. Among them were allies from Trafficante's Florida connections within the Cuban exile movement. The plan envisioned swift air support from Kennedy's planes, creating a surprise attack. However, the invaders find themselves vastly outnumbered by Castro's forces. In a crushing defeat, Kennedy failed to provide the promised air support, leading to the end of the American invasion in just 3 days. The CIA's poorly executed plan leaves Castro victorious, transforming him into a national hero. Trafficante's dreams of reviving his Cuban empire crumble as the men he backed face death or imprisonment. Feeling double-crossed, first by Castro and now by Kennedy's failure to follow through, Trafficante placed the blame squarely on President Kennedy. As the new administration shifted focus to Cuba, the Kennedys initiated a crackdown on organized crime, with Attorney General Bobby Kennedy leading the charge. Bobby Kennedy's pursuit of organized crime intensified Trafficante's animosity, and he sought payback. Despite the adversity, Trafficante kept off phone lines, ensuring he was never caught on bugs or wires, maintaining a level of distance from criminal activities in Chicago. The committee investigating mob connections to Kennedy's assassination in 1975 called Sam Giancana to testify, but he mysteriously met his demise the night before taking the stand. In 1976, the committee summoned his right-hand man, whose explosive testimony led to further questioning. However, he too mysteriously disappeared just 5 days later. Do you want to know what was in Trafficante's posthumous confession to his lawyer? He expressed regret for not targeting Bobby Kennedy. Let us know your favorite parts of this story in the comments. Thanks for watching.